Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Bannon, Airspeed Prime here, the site super moderator for Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com, the Avatar and The Legend of Korra fan site, one of the friendliest ones out there and most open and stuff like that. Some of the best discussion can be found on that site. As well as that, I'm also the main host of that website's podcast, which is the Avatar Online podcast, and again, I highly recommend you listen to that. Not many of the other Avatar podcasts out there are very active at this moment in time with Korra taking a break, but our podcast has not taken a break. We are putting out episodes weekly, episode discussions on Avatar The Last Airbender episodes. We just last week did a big discussion on the subject of this video, The Promise Part 3. We discussed that in great detail. And yep, so I highly recommend you have a look at our site, have a look at the podcast. But enough on that for now. What you're kind of watching this video for is obviously my review of The Promise Part 3. I finally got a hold of a copy of the book. I've been posting about it pretty much like daily about how I could not get the book on the day of release, no matter how hard I tried, and I just had to resort to ordering it online, and it only arrived this morning, October 8th, Monday. It was meant to arrive, I think, like Wednesday last week, but it was something went up. Delivery estimate I think was a bit wrong there, but anyway, just a quick story I suppose on how I couldn't get this book. I tried 2 comic book stores on September 26th, the day of a comic book store release. First comic book store didn't have it, said they didn't get their shipment of it in, though they had it ordered. I then took a bus to another comic book store. They said the same thing, that they were expecting it in, but they didn't arrive in. They said it might be in next week. It wasn't in October 3rd, and yep, I had to resort to ordering it online. As much as I'd love to support my local comic book store, they just didn't get the book in, so that was a bit of an issue. And and anyway, I forgot to mention that on the walk down to the comic book store and then the walk up to the bus stop to get to the other comic book store, it was absolutely lashing rain, so I got absolutely soaked. And I on the same day of release was 2 Transformers comics, and I bought them in and they were put in a paper bag, so I was desperately trying to keep my Transformers comics safe, basically, as I was getting to the bus stop to get to the other comic book store to try and get this. So it was just an all-round pretty bad day, apart from the good Transformers comics obviously, but no Avatar success that day. But anyway, on to my review of this book, as you've finally been waiting for. And yep, the trilogy is finally complete. The Promise, all 3 parts are now out. The series is complete. Obviously Avatar Comics will still continue with The Search, coming for part 1 coming in March, but this is the trilogy. These are 3 books, as you can see here. And just a quick interesting note before I get into it is that there is actually a reprint of part 1. As you can see, the spines of these books are actually different. Part 2 and 3 are the same, but part 1 is different. There's actually a reprint of part 1 where they have the same spine design as these ones. So it's just an interesting thing to note if you're a kind of big comic collector, that you can actually have your kind of 3 books lined up nicely on your shelf. So I basically have the kind of first edition variant kind of spine thing, if you want to take it that way. But anyway, Promise Part 3, the conclusion to this series, and I have to say, I love this this part. It's in my opinion the perfect conclusion to this series. It steps things up so much from part 1 and 2 in terms of the seriousness, how they deal with the various themes explored in the books. It's a lot more serious than part 2, more in line with kind of what happens in part 1, with the seriousness of the promise that's made, and Zuko and Aang nearly going through with that in part 1. And to me, the highlight of this book is actually many fans' lowlight of this whole thing, the whole series. I absolutely loved the characterization for Aang and Zuko in this book. I think Gene Yang, along with Mike O'Brien, who assisted on this, have done a perfect job with the way they've done their characters going forward. It carries on the development from the show perfectly, in that they realise that though it's a nice conclusion for them in the show, what happens in terms of their development. That they're not perfect characters and they still have a very long way to go. And this deals with that really well in that they're both very young at the end of the show, and they kind of play on that a lot here. That they're not going to all make perfect decisions. Zuko is going to realize that he has a trouble making decisions and still continues to make them here. But it's how he deals with that here, and it's a lot to do with kind of their whole maturity and developing as leaders. Both Aang, Zuko, and King Kuei are all very inexperienced. You know, Kuei's a lot older but has very little world experience because of, as we know from the show. So it's three leaders just struggling with with their kind of self doubt is basically the conflict of the promise, and Zuko's self doubt leads him to ask Aang that promise. Aang's kind of self doubt leads to him accepting this promise, and it's kind of all about them realizing the kind of errors of their ways and that they have to change as people to get through this promise and get through this situation. And there's some really nice scenes, especially towards the end of the book, that Zuko and Aang actually sit down in Iroh's tea shop and have a really nice conversation about their kind of flaws, and it's a really honest kind of thing compared to like the basically up until that point they're all kind of like conflict getting in the way, but that at that moment they're just there talking to each other, nothing getting in the way, and they're allowed to just honestly talk to each other. And it's just such a well written scene. People complain about Gene Yang being a terrible writer for this series, but some of the stuff in this is so well done that it actually becomes some of my favourite kind of Avatar, I suppose, content from anything, including all the other comics, including all the shows, ATLA and LOK. It's just, that's how good I consider some of the stuff in this. The way Katara is portrayed in this book is really good too. She is, she kind of shows how much of a part of like Aang as the Avatar that she is, how important to like Aang's decision making kind of process that she is. He obviously has a lot going through his mind here, and she helps him to not make kind of the decisions. And we get some really nice Katang moments between them as they're really honest with each other, and you see how big of a connection they have and that they really are like in love. There's a one panel that I think will just make any Katang fan just kind of like scream and just like yes. I'll actually show you that panel here for a second. Just this page here, that's probably the best way where you can see it. Older Aang and Katara with their first child, who we believe is Kaya. So it's interesting just that Katara is actually thinking about that at this stage. That's how much their relationship is to both of them. That Katara is already thinking about their future together, and that Katara and Sneers actually plays an interesting role in this book too. Both of those are kind of like the two that really come up with the idea that Yu Dao is not Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom, but no nation, it's just Yu Dao. And that's one of the things that plays a big role in this book in relation to Aang, that he's been very much in the same mindset as Roku, because Roku's given him this advice that the four nations must remain four, but because of what's happened in the war, that can't happen anymore. You can't just separate people that have been brought together. That's the kind of one plus, I suppose, from the war, in that people have been brought together. And the group that ultimately ended the war is made up of all four nations. Aang and Katara's relationship is two different nations. Sokka and Suki's relationship is two different nations. It's all about that kind of concept explored in this, and it's really well done. Add to that some really interesting stuff with the Avatar Aang official fan club that will link into into a certain group of characters in The Legend of Korra that will make you go like, that is an amazing reference. And how it deals with the airbender culture and Aang's realization that he is actually the last airbender. Here we kind of get that touched on again too. So yeah, I really love this book. I really recommend not listening to a lot of the negatives said about this series as a whole. I will readily admit that part 2 is the weakest of the three, but it's still a fun read because the characterization is actually spot on. The series is good, so I recommend just being positive. Go into reading these books with an open mind, and you will be pretty pleased with how they play out. And it sets up the search really well with some nice stuff on the last page with a certain crazy character from the end of the series. I'm not going to fully spoil like the whole book for you. I have a written review on the site. You can read that in the description there. The link to it is there. I go into a lot more depth on my thoughts on a lot of the scenes in this book. But this video review is basically to get more of my own thoughts, not just having a lot of time to think about it. Just basically, I have the book now, giving my thoughts on it. So yeah, the series as a whole, I think, is very well done. Just the way all the different storylines set up in part 1 and 2 ultimately do come together in part 3. I think that the Metalbender student kind of plot isn't quite fleshed out as much as I would have hoped, but that's my really only negative about the series as a whole. If those 3 metalbending students come back in future comics, then I think a lot of my complaints about this book will be gone, because if they're developed more in future stuff, and this is just their kind of introduction, that's a great way to do it. So yeah, I highly recommend buying this book. Don't just read it online. Buy this book if you can. Support future Avatar comics. Part 1 and 2 sold well enough that they've started to make the search. The series is selling well enough that there's going to be a hardcover coming out in February 20th and March 5th, the different 2 release dates for the book. So that tells you like that it's been selling well, but it needs to get those sales up. If you can, support the comics, because once the search is over, what more Avatar The Last Airbender stuff will we get, since the focus is going to be on Korra right now. So support that. Again, I love the books, and the series as a whole as well I love. Thank you for listening, watching this video, and bye.